seated. So this is some story, this story of the Transfiguration. This story on the last Sunday before we begin Lent. It's a story that's filled with drama and tension, with surprise characters, and even a little bit of a cranky God, you know? Did you catch that? We hear Luke say, 8 days after these sayings. That's how it's introduced. 8 days after these sayings. It's 8 days after Peter has looked at Jesus and said, "Oh, you're the Messiah." It's 8 days after Jesus has told his disciples, "Look, this isn't going to end pretty. It's not going to go well. We're going to go into Jerusalem, and I'm going to be tortured, and I'm going to be ridiculed, and there's going to be a trial, and I'm going to suffer. I'm going to die." It's 8 days after Jesus has said to his disciples, "If you want to save your life, you must lose it. Anyone who wants to follow me, they have to pick up their cross, and daily they have to follow me." How does this work? So 8 days after all of these sayings, Jesus looks at Peter, John, and James and says, "Hey, come with me. We're going to go up to the mountaintop." He needs to pray. Luke doesn't explain why Jesus feels like he needs to get away to pray. But I'll tell you this, Peter and John and James, they surely should have been on their toes going up to the mountaintop, because it was the understanding for Hebrews that wild things happen up on the mountaintop. That's what happened to Moses in the Exodus story we just heard. Wild things happen on the mountaintop, and something wild is about to happen again. They go up the mountain. Jesus starts to pray. We're not sure what Peter, John, and James are doing. Maybe they're set apart. Maybe they're praying a little bit. Maybe they're making a fire. We don't know. Maybe they're actually laying down and beginning to doze off. Luke does tell us that they're weighed down with sleep. What we do know is that as Jesus is praying, something comes over him, right? Sort of like the light on Harry's face there. His face becomes dazzling. And his, don't get any ideas, Harry, don't get any ideas. But his face begins to shine and his clothes become a dazzling white. Something is happening to Jesus. I can just picture the disciples kind of going, "Oh, what's that glare over there?" You know? And suddenly, out of nowhere, there are two other figures. Moses and Elijah. Two of the greatest figures from the Hebrew stories, from their ancestors. Peter sees them. They recognize that it's Moses and Elijah. And you have to wonder, did they think, my goodness, are we dreaming? Could it really be them? And Luke says that Jesus and Moses and Elijah are talking. Luke's the only one of all the Gospelers who tell the Transfiguration story. He's the only one to say what they're talking about. They're talking about Jesus' future. They're talking about his exodus to Jerusalem, where he will give his life. Only Peter and John and James, they don't hear that. Because they're a little slow to get up to their feet. They're a little slow to approach these three. Eventually, they do. Eventually, Peter gets up and he sees them, and he must have been like, "This is cool." Because he says to Jesus, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Wait. Let's build 3 dwellings. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Let's stay here. This is pretty special." It's a reasonable idea. These holy men are right before him. Who can blame Peter for wanting to hang out and to stay up on the mountaintop? It's a good idea in everyone's mind except God's. And so, for what is is the second time, the first time being at Jesus' baptism when the clouds opened and the voice boomed. For the second time, a voice booms from the heavens and says, "Hey, this is my son. Listen to him." You can almost imagine God saying, "You knucklehead, listen to him." And then it's quiet. And then Jesus is left standing by himself. And Luke writes, Peter, John, and James, they were silent. This is our story. The last Sunday in Epiphany, the season when the stories are about the revelations of who and what Jesus was and is, about Jesus' identity. It began with the Magi's visit, and it ends now with the Transfiguration. And so surely, clearly, simply, this story is about Jesus' identity as something totally special, something totally different and unique. He is one of the holy of holiest in the line of Moses and Elijah. But he's more than that. He is the culmination of Jewish struggle. He is the answer to Jewish prayer. He is the object of Jewish hopes. He is the Messiah. He is something different, this Jesus. He's God's Son. So sure, this story is to teach us that. But I think there's so much more that we can learn from this story. If we look not just at Jesus, but actually, if we look at the disciples who are up on the mountain with Jesus, there's so much that we can learn from them. Some of what to do, and I might say some of what not to do as well. See, we can learn from Peter, John, and James that we've got to stay awake. That we've got to keep our eyes and our ears open. That we've got to be ready for surprises. That we've got to be prepared to see something unimaginable unfold right before our eyes. We've got to pay attention and listen. You know, Peter, John, and James, they were awake enough to catch Elijah and Moses, but just at the end, and they missed the conversation. We've got to keep our ears and eyes open. Listen to the conversation that's holding. We can learn from Peter, John, and James that we can't just stay up on the mountaintop. That wasn't God's plan for them, and it's not God's plan for us. Sure, we can retreat and get away and have our time of peace and safety and of quiet prayer. But then, like Peter, John, and James, we got to come down out of the mountain. We got to wade into the crowds, shoulder to shoulder with Jesus, and shoulder to shoulder with the people in need who are waiting for His love and for His grace. We can't just stay on our mountaintop. We got to go down. And we can learn from Peter, John, and James from what they didn't do. We can learn, don't be silent. Luke writes that they told no one anything of what they had seen and heard. And I want to say, don't do that. This should not be the best kept secret. God knows we need to tell people what we have seen and what we have heard. Don't be silent about these holy moments. Last week we began sort of looking ahead and imagining the next chapter of life for St. Luke's. And I want to say to you that if we can take these lessons that are in today's gospel, we can make sure that the next chapter for St. Luke's will be bright, will be faithful, will be holy, will be spectacular. If we can get away to say our prayers and stay awake, especially during my sermons, and pay attention, keep our eyes and our ears open to something that we don't expect to see, to surprise us, if we can know when we are on holy ground, if we can do that, then we can see people's faces that are lit up. We can find people's lives that are transformed. We can realize that we stand in a history of holy men and, let me be very clear, holy women who have come before us. We can realize that we are privileged to be on holy ground if we show up, stay engaged. But also, then, get out of here. Get off the mountaintop. Get out of this church. It's not just all about safety and peace and comfort. It's about getting out there. It's about wading into the masses. It's about going in there with Jesus and letting people know that Jesus cared about the lonely and about the sick and about the naked and about the hungry and about the wounded. Get out of here and be with Jesus and be with those people. And please, please, tell them what you've seen and heard. Tell them what you've seen. Just for emphasis. Tell them what you've seen. It's not just for the black shirts to tell them. It's not just for those so-called evangelicals to tell them. It's not just for holy rollers to tell them. It's not just for people who live down south to tell them. It is for Episcopalians who live in Rhode Island and who sit in these pews. Do it in your own way. Find your own voice. But tell people what you have seen and heard. Because it's good stuff. And they need to know. They need to know that here, people who are lonely find community. They need to know that here, strangers are embraced. They need to know that here, people who are hungry are fed. They need to know that here, people who need prayers are healed. They need to know that here, we celebrate the Eucharist every Sunday, and here's the best part. All people are invited to share in that Eucharist. Everyone. Find your own way. Find your own voice. But tell these stories. God knows we need to tell these stories. Because the issue isn't that God's still not transforming